Hi everyone, I'm Bria. In this video, I'm going to be going over 24 books I loved in 2024, so let's jump right in. So let's start with one of my favorite books and series ever. It's A Shadow in the Ember. So I first read this book in November of 2022 and I've read it several times since. And then in 2024, I read it in August. As well as the second and third. And then the fourth one came out, I believe in August or maybe September. That's why I reread them. And I haven't finished that one yet. I'm like 80% or maybe 79% of the way through that. I did pick it up when it first came out, and I got about 40% of the way through, but I was hesitant to fully commit to finishing the book at that time because this is one of my favorite series ever and worlds, and one of my favorite female main characters and main male characters ever. So I just like, and this is the last book in this series, so I'm still like, it's getting to the end, or you know, close to the end, and I'm not okay. I'm probably gonna cry when I finish, and then I will probably want to reread all 4 books all over again. So I may end up reading them again in 2025, but even though this was a reread, it is one of my favorite books ever and series, so I had to include it on this list. And then the second one is Wings So Wicked. So I read this twice last year actually, once in May and then again in August when the second book came out, Blood So Brutal. And actually, let me rewind a bit. A Shadow in the Ember is by Jennifer Armentrout, and I believe the series name is Fire and Flesh. And then Wings So Wicked is by Emily Blackwood, and I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look up what the series name is. So this series is called the Golden City series, and this is a 5-star book for me. Blood So Brutal, I believe I gave 3 stars. However, Wings So Wicked was definitely 5 stars. And as you can probably guess, A Shadow in the Ember and that entire series is 5 stars for me. And I already know the 4th one is going to be 5 stars. So moving on, the 3rd and 4th books I loved in 2024 were A Broken Promise and A Simple Truth. I gave A Broken Promise 4 stars and A Simple Truth 5 stars. And I read these in May, and let me look up the author for y'all. So the author is Tatiana Walker, and this is the Freckled Fate trilogy. I'm not sure when the 3rd one is coming out, but I will most likely read it this year if so, or if it's coming out this year. And then the next book that I loved was Of Blades and Wings. I gave this 4 stars and first read it in May, and then again in September when the second book came out, which is Of Frost and Feather, and I gave that one 4 stars as well. So you can probably realize that I almost always, like 99% of the time, have to reread the first or previous books when the next one comes out. I don't have that great of a memory, and I am starting to log like more things in my journal. I've done more in-depth reviews with my thoughts, but I also want to start doing like a synopsis in my own words, so that hopefully with my favorite series that are like 5 stars, I'll want to reread them, but for ones that are like 4 or below, I just want to start with the next book, especially when I have like so many other new releases and books on my list. So Of Blades and Wings is written by Eliza Reign, and it's the Flame Cursed Fae series. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the 3rd one is coming out February 2nd, which is pretty soon, a month away. So I'm looking forward to that next release. And I will say I did look up all the releases yesterday to make sure I have all the dates correct, but I know sometimes they're like pushed back or changed. So if you're looking forward to one, maybe look it up and keep an eye on it on your own, but I'm sure I'll mention it once it's out when I'm reading it. So next is A Court This Cruel and Lovely. So I read this in May along with the other 4 books of this series. So it's A Court This Cruel and Lovely, A Kingdom This Cursed and Empty, A Crown This Cold and Heavy, and A Queen This Fierce and Deadly. And I love those titles. I love that title structure, and I think it's a great structure for fantasy books. So I gave the first one 4 stars, and then the second, third, and fourth 3 stars. And this is by Stasia Stark, and this is the Kingdom of Lies series. And I believe this is just a 4-book series, and then I finished this. And then the next one, which was one of my favorite reads of last year, was When the Moon Hatched. And I will say I gave this 4 stars, but every time I think back on it, I feel like it was a 5-star book for me. I'm not quite sure why I gave it 4 stars. If my memory is correct, I don't know that the plot like ended up being quite as good as I wanted it to be, but the way that the book is written, I loved. I love when books are written in a very like descriptive and almost lyrical way. And I remember this one being like very well written. So the second one is coming out October 7th. I don't know that it has a name yet, but I'm looking forward to that. And I read When the Moon Hatched in June, by the way. Also in June, I read A Tale of Treachery. I gave this 3 stars. However, I remember this being a great read, and I believe this is either a trilogy or there are just 3 books out at this time. It doesn't say, but these books are by Melly Tolam. And now for one of my favorite reads of last year. I actually first read this in March, and I feel like I've been saying that Quicksilver was my favorite new read of last year, but I forgot that I read this book, Powerless, for the first time last year, so I don't quite know. I would maybe tie those like neck and neck for my favorite new read of last year. I'm not quite sure when Powerless came out, but I read it in March and then again in July when the second book came out, which is Reckless, and I gave both of those 5 stars. And the third one is coming out April 8th, so I'm very excited about it. It is like a slow burn, enemies to lovers, but I feel like the author does an amazing job of writing the banter and dialogue between the main characters. And this is by, let me look up who it is. I feel like I know most of these authors, but in the moment, oh yeah, Lauren Roberts. In the moment, I feel like I panic and forget them. And then next, now halfway through 2024, I read The Last Storm and The Last Draig. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but it's spelled D-R-A-I-G. I gave both of these 4 stars, and I don't think I read the third one. I'm not quite sure why I didn't do that, but the 4th one is coming out on January 10th, which is very soon. I feel like I didn't read the 3rd one because I saw that the 4th one was coming out soon and just wanted to wait for that. But the 10th is like very soon. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read those right when the 4th one comes out, but hopefully sometime in January or February. And then a similar situation, I also read House of Beating Wings in July, and I actually gave the 1st and 2nd one 5 stars, although I'm not technically including the 2nd one on today's video or on this list of 24 books. Because the 5th one is coming out on January 30th, and I've read the first 3. I believe I gave the 3rd one either 4 or 3 stars, and I did not read the 4th, and I am looking forward to the 5th, but I feel like I jumped the gun a bit with the 5-star rating on the first book. I've realized that I feel like I give the first book like a half or sometimes a full star rating above what I ultimately feel like it should be, because I'm so excited to enter this new world and start this new series. And so there's a part of me that like wants to go back and change some of my ratings, but I feel like I should really be judging it based on, or I should try to judge it just based on the, the actual book that I'm rating, not the entire series. But it can be hard, especially if I like finish one book and then immediately pick up the next one. That being said, I do feel like this series is one that I should re-rate. So I plan to do that in January or February when I read these. And then I'm excited about this series I found in August. It's Blood and Steel. Actually, I just realized I never went over the House of Beating Wings author. The author is Olivia Wildenstein, and it's the Kingdom of Crows series. And the last 2, I think the Last Storm series is just called like the Rogue X Ara series, and then Powerless, I believe, is just called the Powerless series or the Powerless trilogy. So Blood and Steel was written by Helen Scherer. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her last name, but it's the, hold on, I'm gonna have to get that pen from Hazel. She loves to play with my bullet journal pens. So this is the Legends of Thesmar series, and Blood and Steel is the first, and then Vows and Ruins, Fate and Furies, and Shadow and Storms. And I gave all 4 of those 4 stars. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I read these in August. This is before I started doing half ratings, so I feel like this series would be like 4.5s across the board. 4 seems a little low because it is a great series, but I definitely wouldn't rank it as like up there with A Shadow in the Ember and my 5-star ones. Now for Quicksilver, which again is my favorite or top, two if they're tied, books that I read for the first time last year. So I read this in September, and the second one is coming out in November 18th, which is so far away. I like can hardly wait. But this is definitely like a dark, like not fantasy, yes, a dark fantasy, but also like a like villain gets the girl, dark man. I don't know what's that term, morally gray man. He's definitely a morally gray man. I love my morally gray men, and I loved this one. So I'm really looking forward to this book coming out. This is probably my most anticipated new release of this year. Also the third Powerless, and then the third Fourth Wing, and then there are a couple others, but I would say those are my top 3. And then September was an exciting month because I got my first ARC, which is an advanced reader copy. So this is for Deadly Occupants, and it was actually my first like thriller book that I've read, or at least since I was a child. So I gave this 4 stars. It's by, I believe it's Mads Rafferty. Yeah, Mads Rafferty. And she has a fantasy series. I believe it's called Heir of Broken Fate, which I've read before and also recommend. And this was a great read. However, I love my happily ever after, and this did not quite give me a happily ever after. So I feel like if she releases a second book, I'll have to read it though, just to like hopefully get my happily ever after or resolve everything. And then also in September, I actually have 3 more books from September to go over. That must have been a really great reading month for me. The first was Marked by the Moon, which I gave 4 stars, and let me look up the author. This is by Helen Scott, and it's the Bound by the Veil series. I don't know that I've finished the series or if it's completed yet. And then the next one is A Crown of Tears and Treason, which I gave 5 stars. And this series is called The Curse of Silver Secrets and Cruel Shadows. So quite a long series name, but this one was really great. It's by Vera Ray, and it had a plot twist at the end that I did not see coming, and that made it really hard because the second book isn't out yet. It is coming out February 25th though, so about 2 months or a month and a half. So I'm definitely looking forward to this release. I would say this is in like my second tier of releases that I'm most excited about. Also in September, I read The Crown of Oaths and Curses and gave this 5 stars. And then I gave the second one The Throne of Honor and Blood. And I just gave this one 4 stars. However, I really love this book because especially the first one, because it's like a true enemies to lovers, but I feel like a lot of enemies to lovers are actually just like rivals to lovers, or they're like light enemies, and this one is like true enemies, like I want to kill this person, enemies to lovers. So I love that. And then for October, I reread A Court of Thorns and Roses. So this is a 5-star book and series for me. I'm only including A Court of Thorns and Roses in this list of 24 though, because that would be an automatic, I think 5 extra 5-star books. So I didn't want to take up too much room with this series, although it is like one of my favorites. So I first read this in May of 2022, and then I didn't do a great job of keeping track of my rereads, but like I mentioned, I reread this in October, and I am planning on rereading Throne of Glass soon, because Throne of Glass is another one of my favorite series. So I think it'll be a great way to start 2025. And I just realized The Crown of Oaths and Curses, I believe this is by J. Bree. Yeah, J. Bree, and this series is The Mortal Fates. And then A Court of Thorns and Roses, or ACOTARs, by Sarah J. Maas. And then also in October, I wanted to include, since I included the thriller, I wanted to include another one that was a little different from what I typically read or what I typically love, but it still made a lasting impression on me. So this is Psycho Academy. I've read all 6 books. I think I read the first 3 at the beginning of the year and then did the last 3 at the end, and I gave this one 3 stars. I think I gave all 6 of them 3 stars, and it is a reverse harem, which I don't typically love, and if I would have known that, I wouldn't have picked it up. So that is one thing that I'm gonna start doing a little more research on, but I did love how it was written, or how the point of view of the main character was written, because she like has a lot of problems and things she's working through, and I feel like the author does a really great job of like portraying that. And there's sometimes like some moments of like madness a little bit as she tries to cope or like avoid certain things, and I just felt like the writing style was like it really put you inside her mind. And then we're getting close to the end. In November I read Reign of Shadows and Endings and gave this 4 stars. And then I also read Storm of Secrets and Sorrow and Tempest of Wrath and Vengeance and gave those both 4 stars. I've read these before, or at least the first 2, but I can't quite remember when I first read them. But these are by, I think it's Melissa Roerich, and it's the Legacy series, and the 4th one is coming out in August, on August 28th. And let me actually go over the next one because it's by the same author. This is Lady of Darkness. I actually DNF'd either Lady of Darkness or the second one, Lady of Shadows, the first time I read them. Because they are pretty similar to ACOTAR and Throne of Glass. However, the more you get into the series, the more they differ, and I do feel like this is a great series just on its own. So the books are Lady of Darkness, and then Shadows, Ashes, Embers, and Starfire. So Lady of in between all of those. And I gave all of these 4 stars. And again, they are similar to those other books. So if you've recently read those, I don't recommend starting these, but if it's been a bit of time, I definitely recommend them. And I would go into it with the mindset of like, these things, while they are similar, are hopefully, or at least for me, they're elements that I love of the other books. And so it's just giving me more like material that I love to read. And for all I know, she could have written these before ACOTAR or Throne of Glass were written. So definitely don't want to like throw the author under the bus for that. And this is a completed series. However, it's in the same world as Reign of Shadows and Endings, and a couple of the characters make an appearance, and Reign of Shadows and Endings hasn't finished yet, so I'm really excited about it. I did feel the urge to reread the first 3 books once I finished Lady of Darkness, because I like could remember the secondary characters had like a whole new meaning to me, and I wanted to reread the parts that they're in, but I'm just gonna wait until August because I have so much to read right now. But I am really looking forward to getting to reread the first 3, and then the 4th one as well. And then we have 2 more to go, or 2 more series. So the first is Bound and Barbed. I gave this 4.5, and then I gave Made and Marred 4, and then Sewn and Scarred 4 for an average of 4. And I read these in December, and I actually did a full page review for these. So, oh, perfect. So these are by Samantha Good, and I read these from December 7th to 9th, 9th to 13th, and 14th to 18th. And my thoughts were that it's a great series, and I'm excited for the spin-off series or book that's going to come with 2 of the secondary characters. I feel like they could have, or the author could have like wrapped their story up nicely in a neat little bow, but of course she didn't. So I wish that book was out already so I could just jump right to it, but I have a feeling that by the time it does come out, I'm gonna look forward to jumping back into this world. And then I also put that the first book was great, and then that the second and third were boring at parts, particularly in a certain location. Wish those moments were cut down a bit. So I spoke about this in more detail in my last video. However, I think this location served to be like a moment in the book for a breather and to introduce secondary characters. I just wish that the scenes were like trimmed down a bit. And then the ending of the third book after the battle was a little cheesy with some of the characters. It was 8 of them. And then I loved all the secondary characters except one of them. It was annoying how he dragged his feet, although I think she was trying to portray accurate, flawed characters. And then I did shed a few tears at the end, but I was on my period. That's why I gave the book, or the third book, 4 stars instead of 3.5 though. I was like leaning towards 3.5. And then lastly, I ultimately didn't feel like it was that big or complex of a conflict. It felt like it was solved easily, but it was only a trilogy. So I've come to the realization that when series are just a trilogy or even a duology, I don't feel like it gives the author enough time, unless the books are really long, to like really dive into a really complex conflict that really feels like life and death. Like for example, Throne of Glass has like such complex conflict, and when they solve one thing, another thing like pops up that they didn't quite realize, or like more information is revealed, and it's like they're trying to find, you know, the root cause of all of all these things. And so I feel like I don't get that in these series. So I feel like especially the secondary character that annoyed me, like he basically caused all of this, him and a couple other people, and it just felt like ultimately like this could have been solved, which I guess you could say that about like a lot of conflict and wars, like it's just caused by like two people who get in a fight and don't know how to make up. But yeah, I think if I'm doing more research, which I'm not always, sometimes I just like pick up a book that I see recommended, but if I were to do more research, I think I would try to choose more completed series, but also ones that are like 4 or more books. And then lastly, a book I picked up at the end of December was The King of Frost and Shadows. So I gave this 4.5 stars. And this is by Jen L. Gray, and I read it from the 29th to the 30th, and then I read the second one after, and then I haven't picked up the third one yet. However, I plan to after I finish Born of Blood and Ash. And again, I gave this 4.5 stars, and then I'll kind of summarize my thoughts again since I talked about them in the last video, but it would have been a 5 if it didn't have the memory loss trope, which is one of my least favorite tropes. And I just wish it would have addressed her memories coming back a little bit more, because she all of a sudden gains these fighting skills and is put in a situation, a competition where she needs them. So I just felt like it was a little too like convenient and perfect that she all of a sudden can hold her own, even though she has no memories of like learning how to fight. And then it was kind of an urban fantasy, although she was really only on Earth for the first like chapter, a few chapters. And the author did mention Halsey in the beginning, and I was just like, this is a little weird. Like, I don't need to be reminded that artists like Halsey exist when you're also going to this world of fae who have wings. So nothing against Halsey. And then I put lastly, always love the fated mates trope and love their dialogue. So I think why I gave this a 4.5 instead of a 4 is because the author does a really great job of writing their dialogue and the scenes between them. So overall, I would say my favorite new reads were Powerless and Quicksilver, and then my favorite rereads were A Shadow in the Ember and then ACOTAR, of course. So it was a great year of reading, and while this is 24 books I loved in 2024, I loved way more books than that, and I'm really looking forward to all of the new releases and rereads that I have planned for this year. It's only the beginning of January, and it's already off to a great start. So if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one. And always remember that you are pure magic.